Hi everyone, so let's start with the Angular interview question and answers. Some most common questions that can be asked in the interview will be discussed here. So first of all, what is Angular? So Angular is a framework and a platform actually which is used for building client-side web applications, and we are using TypeScript language in it. And actually, the previous version of Angular was called AngularJS. Anything before the version 2 of Angular is AngularJS. And this newer version, which is based on TypeScript, this framework is called Angular 2 Plus. It's Angular. It's commonly referred to as Angular instead of AngularJS. And that's also our next question. Uh, uh, what's the difference between AngularJS and Angular? So AngularJS is actually the original version of Angular, which was based on JavaScript. And this is now considered outdated, and now Angular 2 Plus is the new version, and it's referred to as Angular only instead of AngularJS. And this Angular is only based on JavaScript, as I said. That's the main difference also, that you have one based on JavaScript, one based on uh, TypeScript. Of course, there are other improvements as well. There are other features that are added to Angular now. AngularJS didn't have those features, and also the performance is very improved. So the next question is like, what is data binding in Angular? So data binding is actually a feature in Angular that allows automatic synchronization of data between the view and the model behind the view. View is of course, this web area that you see, and the model is behind the logic, or the model behind the data model. So that's this feature that allows this synchronization, or this flow of data, you can say, that is called data binding. And there are two types of data bindings: one-way data binding and two-way data binding. Let's go through that question first. Um, Maybe we can explain that later. Uh, so actually, one-way data binding is from model to the view, and two-way data binding is even if it is both ways, like with data from the data flow from the view to the model, and also from model to the view. And if in two-way data binding, we have this ng model directive. Maybe you have seen that if you know Angular. Uh, okay, what are the components now in Angular? This is a very important question. Components, we know, are the basic building blocks of Angular. They are, it's like, they are, self-contained, reusable um, parts of the code that can be used or reused in different ways, and in associated behaviors. We can show you that by example. For example, we have a root component which is called the app component, and when we want to define a component, we always use this directive. And we import this library from the Angular core, and here is the name of the component and the template that is associated with this component. And you do it like this: export class app component, to make it available to the other parts of the code, so that it can be used. Uh, yeah, in the same way, we can define our header components, which can be reused by different parts of the code, because the header will be the same on different web pages, or the sidebars, whatever. Here we have, for example, a product list component defined, and this is the HTML page of or the URL of this product list component. That's the name of this component, and that's how we export it. Uh, Let's see the next question. Yeah, explain one-way and two-way data binding. So I've already covered this in the previous question. So one-way data binding is it binds data from the model to the view, from or vice versa. It's only one way. So it's not simultaneous in both directions. at the same time. It's either from model to view or from view to model. So that's the correct thing. It can be from view to model or model to view, but it is one way at a time. But two-way data binding is data flow in both directions, simultaneously. And you use it's achieved. You use this ng model directive in Angular to do this two-way data binding. Okay, explain the Angular module and its purpose. So module is actually it's a container which contains different directives, pipes, services like for example providers. So it contains our imports and it defines the application structure and the dependencies on it. And components of course play a crucial role in Angular's. Okay, this is the components that are also part of this Angular modules, and we will have an example here. So you see here we have import, uh, which we are importing this directive gmodel, and then different components, and this product list component, and then we have some declarations here, and then we have some imports here again. Then we have providers. We can define here these services here. Uh, and the next is like at the end you export this class because the name of the module is app module, so that it can be used by other parts of the code. And so what are Angular directives? Directives are instructions actually that Angular use to modify the behavior or appearance. Like you must have seen ng if, ng for, ng class directives, just like we have if and for, and these kind of directives in these kind of statements in normal programming. For Angular we have ng if, ng for, to make different kinds of decisions uh, and to change the behavior based on some conditions and things like this, or the appearance. So appearance, for the appearance we use the ng class. So we continue with the Angular interview questions and answers. So dependency injection in Angular. This is an important question. What is dependency injection in Angular? Dependency injection is actually a design pattern which is used in Angular to manage the creation and sharing of the application components and services. What does that mean is that we provide actually the object of the class as into the constructor of the class that is going to use it. Instead of creating an object, we're using this new keyword or whatever way. So this helps us in providing us this capability that there is a loose coupling between the components and services, because we are declaring the dependency in fact, and we are not creating the dependency directly in the class. We are just declaring the dependency in the constructor of the class that is or service that is going to use this service. Next, data binding types in Angular. Okay, there are actually 4 types of data binding in Angular. One is interpolation. Interpolation, you use these brackets, and inside the brackets you have your variable. And property binding is you have these big brackets. In event binding, you have smaller brackets, and in two-way binding, you use this ng model, so this two-way binding is ng model keyword is used, and you have these big brackets and small parentheses. So you interpolation, property binding, event binding, and two-way binding. So these are the 4 types of data binding in Angular. We can describe them in detail later in another question. So next we have again dependency injection. Dependency injection, to explain it more, dependency injection is actually a fundamental concept. It's a design pattern that promotes the principle of the inversion of control. So it allows you to provide a dependency such as services to the components and services rather than having to create their dependency directly. So you don't create an object inside the class, but you provide the dependency through the constructor of the component and the services that are going to use this service. Like you have the constructor of the component or services, and if it's going to use another service, you simply declare this in the constructor, the object. And this makes our code more modular, testable. Of course, it's easy to test also because you can create test services or test classes, and you can inject your components or services in them, and kind of create those test cases. So there's a coupling between the test cases and the real code. And we are going to describe now dependency injection using some example. Let's say we have a service called user service. So you see we have a user service. We have this injectable keyword here for dependency injection. So user service is the class and get user functions, which is going to return this list of users. Now we want to use this user service in another component or service. Let's say we want to use this user service in this user list component. So user list component is a component. We use this component directive. So we have selector, template, and then we have this class name, user list component. And here in the constructor, we are injecting this user service in the constructor, and you can simply use this .user service .get users to get the user list in this component. So that's how we are going to use this service is injected in this component. We are also we can also use services into another services. For example, let's say we want to log here, use a logger here. So we create a logger service. This logger service is simply printing a message that is passed to this log function of this log service class. It's an injectable class. So now we want to inject this logger service into our user service. So that's how we are going to do this. So the logger service is going to be provided here inside the constructor of the user service, and then it's declared here, and then you use this logger service object .log and simply add fetching users string to it, and it will print fetching users when this get users will be called here. So get users will be called here because user service is injected into the user list component, and when get user will be called, this user service, which is using the logger service, is going to print this. As you see, logger service log is defined here in the logger service class. Yeah, so that's what that's how dependency injection is done in Angular. This is the concept of dependency injection in Angular. So now next concept, what is lazy loading? Lazy loading is also a very important concept in Angular. Actually, lazy loading is very important when you have very big applications. Lazy loading is actually a technique that is used in Angular where the user, or the developer is going to load the parts of the application only when they are needed. We're not going to initialize everything even if it's not needed. You're going to load those parts of the code or initialize them and use them only when they are needed in the code. This reduces the initial load time, and it is achieved by creating separate feature modules and configuring the router to load them on demand. So you create separate feature modules and then you use the router to load them on demand. So this really improves the initial loading performance, and lazy loading is used, as I said, in large applications with many routes. So let's see by example how lazy loading is done. Let's see, we have here a module and which is called a product module. We define the routes of this product module, which is product list component and product detail component, and here there are declarations and imports inside the module. And so we are going to to lazy load this product module, uh, and let's see how we are going to do it. We go to uh, our main app routing module, and in the route we add this load children keyword. Using this children keyword, we will provide the route to our lazy loaded modules. Actually, it's not so visible here, so I can show you here also. These are my lazy loaded modules. Like, this is the product module, and this is the home module. This one is the home module. And so we are going to have this path after this, this product module here and the home module here. So we provide this lazy loading the module that we have to lazy load in this route using this load children keyword, and in our app routing module, in the route of the app routing module. And then what we do next, we make sure that our main app module is using this app routing module, with the app routing module has this module, app products module, as lazy loaded in its route. So we make sure that our main app module is using this app routing module, and then the next step and the last step is that our app component.html file, it's going to include this lazy router outlet, sorry, where inside this lazy loaded content will be displayed. So inside this template we are going to display our lazy loaded content. For example, for example, the home module and this product module. We are going to display it inside this router outlet keyword. So these are the steps that you use to lazy load different modules in our services in our uh, uh, Angular app. So the interviewer can also ask you to describe in detail these data binding types in Angular, which are interpolation, property binding, event binding, or two-way binding, and to write them how you know. So let's go to that. So first of all is interpolation. Interpolation is written like this. You have your variable like this inside these double brackets on the HTML page of your application. And this is a one-way data binding technique. In interpolation, you go from the model to the view. Like, for example, from your component, any of the properties inside your components or defined in your components is going to be displayed on the view on the HTML page. And this is the only this way, from model to view. uh, this is called interpolation. The next is property binding. Property binding is done like this. For example, you have an image, you will have a keyword, and then you provide the URL or path to the image. So using property binding, you go from the web to the, or from the view to the model. So your property from so this is also one way, but from the view to the model. Image URL is the property in the component, and this is like inside the model or inside the component, and this is set to the source property of the image from the HTML or the view page. Okay, the next is event binding. So event binding is a data binding in which which is used to respond to the user actions. For example, user clicks on a button and something in our component inside the code, something, or inside our models or services components, especially, you can say, mainly some action is triggered or some function is called, something is handled. For example, in this case, this is the function that is defined inside our component, and this function will be called when this button on the UI will be, or on the view will be clicked by the user. And the next is the last two-way binding. This is a two-way binding. It's only two-way binding, and it is using the ng model directive. Uh, so in this case, the data is normally flowing in both directions, from the web, from the view to the model, and from the model to the view. For example, a username property is a property defined in the component, but when the user inputs something from the web, some username, it is this value goes to the component, and also it can go in the other way, like if the value is any value this property gets inside the component is also displayed on the view. So this is a two-way kind of a data binding thing. It binds both properties in the components and also events from the view. And it's simultaneous. This is happening both ways simultaneously. What are the lifecycle hooks in Angular? Yeah, so Angular has several lifecycle hooks which are allowing the developer to react to the changes in it depending on what's the state of the component right now. For example, ng on init, ng on changes, ng after view init, and ng on destroy. So these are the four common hooks that are used in Angular, and these hooks provide us the opportunity to perform certain tasks depending on what we want to do at a specific stage of a component's life cycle. For example, this ng on init hook is called hook or function, you can say, is called when, for example, the component is initialized, but the child view of the components is not yet initialized. And ng after view init is called, this hook is called when the component is also initialized and also its child view is already initialized. And ng on destroy hook is called just before the component is going to be destroyed and it's going to be removed from the DOM. So this hook is normally used, for example, when we want to unsubscribe some observables or something, or we want to close some connections, or any kind of connection, let's say some API connections or some database connections, whatever, or we want to kind of release the resources. That's where this NDO destroy is called. It happens just before we do these kind of tasks, as you know, that just before we are destroying the component. So we use this ng on destroy at that time. And the last one, ng on changes, is called whenever any one or more properties inside the component change, and we want to do some action based on this change in the property of this component, then this ng on changes hook is used. Yeah, so this is some explanation of the Angular lifecycle hooks, which is a very important question in an Angular interview.